Well, I mean, in some ways, we're in a very different place than we were 50 years ago, and we can thank protest for that. In many ways, we are also in some of the same places that we were 50 years ago, and we can thank various frictive forces that work against institutional change for that. And so I want to say something that's going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. On the one hand, protest is incredibly important and potentially quite impactful, and we can document lots of instances of particular protests, but many of the problems that we're talking about that initiated this round of protests and that also are happening during the protests are problems with policing that we've seen for a long, long time, suggesting that the changes that have been made haven't gone far enough and that we need to do some real thinking about um, maybe body cameras, which the research shows aren't terribly effective at reducing police misconduct. Maybe some of the solutions that people have hopped on are not the big picture thinking we need and the practical change at the same time we need.
We often hear from people say, I'm totally 100% behind peaceful protesting. But when you start looting, when you start committing crimes against other people and damage to property, that's a different story. It crosses the line. And yet you hear from protesters saying, well, we've tried very peaceful, very soft ways of trying to have our voices heard, but that hasn't worked. Is there some kind of a middle ground in this case?
Historically, looting and property damage that is unrelated to police action prompting escalation is pretty rare. I mean, it's not that it never has happened, but it is not as common as people think. Like, people have this iconic image of like a 1960s or 70s riot and huge amounts of property damage. And historically speaking, those peaceful protest is way more common. And so when people look at looting or property damage or violence during protests, they're bracketing a particular kind of property damage, a particular kind of property reappropriation. So to give your viewers a sense of a comparison, and I'm not making a legal comparison here, I'm just trying to set property expropriation in a wider perspective. Right now, civilian law enforcement agencies in the United States take huge amounts of money through civil asset forfeiture. In 2014, law enforcement actually took more money through civil asset forfeiture than burglars stole in property in the United States. And I think what the movement is really calling for, as I understand it, is for us to take a step back and say, okay, if we're trying to talk about how do we reduce violence, let's talk about not just how do we reduce protester violence, but how do we reduce police violence. If we want to talk about the reduction of looting, how do we reduce what would be legally defined as looting, but also the way in which many poor people and people of color have assets taken away from them legally in the United States.
And we have heard from people about how the incident with George Floyd is not unique. It's not new. It has happened in the past. And there has really not been a consistent or serious change moving forward. Do you think this is going to be a different case when it comes to moving forward and making some changes?
Well, we're already seeing some changes around the country. We saw yesterday, I think it was, the LA mayor announced reductions to the budget for LAPD that was going to be reinvested in communities of color. We've seen individual police officers fired around the country for their misconduct, but we also see other departments where you can watch a lot of videos of NYPD officers who are beating people who don't appear at all attached to protests. You could find them attacking media. You could find similar videos in other places. And so I think we're looking at a situation where there are some signs of progress in some places and some signs that things are still stuck in other places. Unless the federal government were to change some fundamental legal structures that govern how local police departments do their business or what they have to do in order to get federal money, you will see these very decentralized changes because that's the nature of policing in the United States.
Dr. Jennifer Earl, professor of sociology, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much.